Welcome to More Than Miles. Whether you're on a run, driving, doing laundry, or cleaning your house, thanks for taking us along. On this podcast, we believe that our athletes are so much more than their body and sport. So we dive deep with conversations and expert interviews to widen the lens on what it means to be a happy and healthy endurance athlete. I'm Dr. Kate Mihevik-Edwards, physical therapist, author, educator, and former endurance athlete. Through 12 plus years of successfully treating thousands of frustrated athletes and navigating my own health struggles, I've learned so much, and I really can't wait to share it with you.
And I'm Dr. Kacy Sinders. I'm a physical therapist, runner, and advocate for mental health and endurance sports. As an athlete myself, I understand the endurance athlete lifestyle and the impact that injury can have on our daily rhythm. I'm also known for my T-Rex costume and Wiggle Wednesday series on Instagram. Our goal is to always keep our athletes healthy on and off the road. As a wise woman named Pink once said, let's get this party started.
Hi, welcome everybody to More Than Miles. We're so glad you're here. We had the pleasure of speaking with Dr. Jackie Merritt. She's a physical therapist, biomechanist, has a PhD in neuroscience, is a nationally competitive trail runner, author, and mom. I had the pleasure of meeting and working with her while she was doing her postdoc at Emory University. We're so excited to have her on today. Thank you so much for making the time to talk to us, Jackie.
Yeah, I'm honored to be on your podcast.
I remember the first time we met. As soon as we met, we knew we wanted to work together and do things together because we were both physical therapists and runners. And yeah, I'm really sad you moved.
I'm sad too. I miss Atlanta. I was actually back last week running through the city like, oh, I really miss Atlanta. Kansas is not the same, guys.
No. Is it at least a little cooler there?
It is. There are literally no hills. I cannot find a hill, not even on a bridge. There's no bridges. There's no water here either. Everything kind of looks the same. I mean, everyone's very nice here. And like, it's kind of weird because it's the pandemic when we moved, but it's definitely not the same as Atlanta. I miss Atlanta.
Oh, I bet. And one thing about Atlanta I didn't know until I moved here was it is really hilly.
It is really hilly. Definitely a shock to my system last week when I was running those hills and Wilkers, that road in Decatur that's like insanely hilly. It's like a 14% grade. I was grinding up this thing like, oh my gosh, I forgot about this hill.
Awesome. Well, we have a lot to talk about because you are this incredible person and you have so much knowledge and you've done really great things. But I really wanted to start talking about first kind of what you're doing right now. You have this PhD in neuroscience, and what are you studying? What are you working on?
Oh, good question. I am actually still in my postdoc at Emory. I'm finishing it remotely. We had to shut down our experiments with COVID last year. And so that was actually why I was back last week to finish some of those experiments. But basically what I'm doing right now, I am measuring brain activity in older adults and stroke survivors when we have them stand on this plate on the ground and then we pull the plate out from underneath of their feet and they have to recover their balance and we're measuring what their brain does. It's actually a really fun experiment. Yeah, so we're trying to measure and characterize how the cortex is maybe contributing to balance control and how this might change with aging, and then how that is affected after someone who's older has a stroke that affects, that part of their brain. So
that sounds like a really fun experiment, actually. A little scary if you ask me, but a lot of fun.
Yeah, we've had people who are like really anxious that just couldn't do the experiment. It is a little unsettling when you're like standing there and someone's like pulling the thing out from you, but the brain activity looks really cool. There's all kinds of stuff that we see the brain doing. Like the brain is just trying to basically do everything to protect the head at all costs. That's literally what the brain does in that scenario. And so depending on people's impairments with aging and then impairments after stroke, you see them do all kinds of stuff. Like if their lower legs don't react fast enough, of course they'll, we've all seen older adults kind of like throw out their arms and like, just like anything, they're like, break my wrist, break my shoulder, anything, but just like protect my brain, which is a really good strategy. We also have people attached to the ceiling in a harness for this. So we have never had anyone fall or anything like that. So it isn't actually like a very safe setup, and in case anyone was wondering. But yeah, that's kind of what I'm doing right now.
I wanted to ask the logistics of that. Like, I needed to know what happened once this force plate moved. So thank you for clarifying.
We have someone standing close by to like step in, and then last case scenario is like the harness engages, and we have them in one of those mountain climber harnesses, and they're just sitting in the harness suspended to the ceiling. We've always stepped in before that happened. Like, we've definitely had people unable to recover, but good about stepping in and saving them before that even happens. So
that's good. When did you start running?
So my background in high school was basketball. I actually went to a really small Catholic high school. We didn't even have a cross-country team or anything. So basketball was my sport. I played it all year round, pretty much, off season, like training, conditioning, all of that. I didn't start running until I joined triathlon club in undergrad. And so then I basically found that I was really, of all three events, I was definitely excelling at running the most. From there, I found trail running, and then, of course, ultra running, and then it's all over from there. So that's kind of the evolution of my running career.
In the beginning of this conversation, spoken like a true trail runner, saying that you missed the hills of Atlanta and it was so boring and flat in Kansas City, which I think is hilarious. But Jackie, we have a little bit of a less illustrious way of meeting in the community than you and Kate, because we just have some mutual friends. And I believe we met for the first time in person at a Christmas cookie party where there was a very intense cookie baking competition.
Yeah.
It was intense.
Ours did get a little intense.
Wait, was this a competitive cookie competition too?
It wasn't supposed to be, but then we had like a tiara for the winner. You kind of wanted to get the tiara. And my husband and I, like, we were each making our own batches of cookies. And so we were like trying, like competing for kitchen time and like hiding like our secret like cookies from each other and trying to bake off in the same house. It was pretty funny.
There's nothing like a bunch of endurance athletes trying to not be competitive.
Yeah, for real though. So Jackie, when did you get into ultramarathons? Like, tell me a little bit about your first ultramarathon experience.
I ran this 50 miler. It's in my hometown where I grew up in Maryland. It's called the JFK 50 miler. It's actually one of the largest ultramarathons in the US, if not the largest in terms of number of participants. I think there's like 1,500 people in like a normal year that will run it, which is a lot for an ultra, especially one that runs on the single track. It's, I think, the only race, like sanction race, that still is allowed to use the Appalachian Trail, because it's been going on for over 50 years now, and it's like a historic race. That was my first ultra. I did that when I was in, I think I might have been like a junior or senior in college and undergrad. I kind of did that just as like a bucket list item. Like, I'd run a marathon or two, and I was kind of like, I have to do like this hometown race that I always thought everyone was so crazy when you read about the lead up and build up to this in the paper, because it's like a pretty small town. For the whole week leading up to the event, this is like the thing happening, pretty much nothing else. So I was like, I want to check the box and like do this thing. And then I was training with my friend who was doing it every year, and he would always talk about how life-changing it was. And I was kind of like, I want to have that experience. Like, I kind of want to test and like see what that's like. When someone says something changed their life, it definitely provoked curiosity in me. And so that was kind of what triggered me to do my first ultra. I would say it did not go very well. Like, I had stomach issues. I don't know, like typical stuff. I think I finished in like a little over 9 hours or something. Within the week later, I was like, I think I could run that faster if I didn't have stomach issues. And like, I just did the same training. And so, there I was towing the line next year. And I think I cut almost 2 hours off my time or something. Wow. So it was that time in your running career where your like times are just exponentially like declining, and you're like, oh yes, this is amazing. Oh, yeah. In those days. So you have to work a lot harder to get like to shave the minutes off once you get some more experience in running under your belt. But it was 2009.
That's when I graduated. I think that's when I graduated PT school. So you've done so many ultra marathons since then. You've done 50 milers, you've done 100 milers. What is it about trail running and ultra marathons that you like?
Oh gosh, the longer the race is, the I've never been like the fastest runner in terms of pure talent and genetic gift and whatever. I've always like worked really hard, I think. I think everyone does, but I don't think I'm naturally speedy. And I really liked that as the distances got longer, I found that your performance was dependent on more elements, like your ability to grit it out, and like things got really crappy and like, it was kind of about like who could just like puke on the trail at mile like 65 and then just like run another 35 miles in, like just like that type of stuff. Like there was like this more cognitive element to it. I don't know, it required more troubleshooting in the race. And then also if you had to go to the bathroom, it didn't like totally crush your time. Like if you're going for a marathon PR and you have to like go to the bathroom or like pee or something, it's like, oh, well, there goes the PR. I just worked like my butt off for 6 months to get like, 45 seconds off.
That's right.
So I think I liked all of those things about long distance ultra running. I just really liked being out there all day. Marathon running your fastest marathon is like a different kind of dig deep. I think running 100-miler is more, it's a different type of challenge. They're both really, really hard. And I don't think one is harder than the other. I like the type of challenge that the 100-miler brings. But I also really enjoy running I wouldn't say I really enjoy, but I do still get out there and run the faster races because they're really freaking hard to do too. So yeah, but I've actually only run 4 100-milers because 100-milers will kick you in the butt.
Oh, really? That seems so strange that 100 miles would do that to somebody. And only 4?
I know, right? Crazy. I'm also a person that really likes my sleep. So I just love and thrive in like the 50-mile distance because you can like start after breakfast and you're kind of like done by dinner time and like you can get to bed at night. And 100-miler, you're going to be out there all night. And then your whole week is like thrown off, but they're nice to do every once in a while. So
what do you think about out there for 50 miles or 100 miles?
Oh man. Well, usually especially before like a 100-mile race, I'll spend like the week before thinking about what I'm going to think about.
I love it. You're such a scientist.
I don't know. I don't listen to music really when I run, but I do reserve, if the race allows it, I do reserve music for like the later part of a 100-miler, like after mile 60 to 70. It gives you kind of like a fresh sensory perception when like you've been going for, that many dozen hours or however long you've been out there at that point. And so music is something I tap into when I'm kind of in a little bit of a rough spot or like my brain is just going in these like pathological loops about like something negative. Usually what I try to do is, especially later in the first 50 miles, I don't know, I could be thinking about anything, probably not even related to the race. But then later in the race, everyone will probably catch themselves thinking about something negative, and then that can go into like a feedback loop of like more negativity and like, cascading into this like downward spiral. And then before you know it, your life's going to be over if you like drop out of this race. I try to like just catch myself or like observe what's happening in my brain. It's kind of like what you do in meditation, where you're kind of like just this observer of your thoughts, and you're just like, whoa, you are like, these thought patterns are just like going batshit crazy. You are clearly not thinking straight right now. It's almost kind of like funny where your thought patterns will go sometimes if you can be aware of it. So sometimes I do that, but then when everything else fails, I usually get music. Pacers can help too if the race allows pacers later in the race. I usually save my pacers in a 100-miler till after mile like 65 or something too, so that they can bring a fresh perspective as well.
I have to say, every time I talk to ultra runners, which is actually a lot of my friend group right now, I feel like a delicate little flower who runs marathons. It just,
Marathons are hard.
I feel like I do nothing.
Marathons are hard.
No, marathons are crazy hard. You're like redlining the entire race of a marathon. At least that's what I feel like when I run a road marathon.
Yeah, this is very true. They're just different. They're different beasts for sure. But something I love that you talked about with your first 50 miler is this like curiosity of what you can do, seeking out these experiences that are going to change your life. And I'm just wondering, like, has that evolved over time, or would you find that that's still like one of your main motives for racing and pushing yourself?
I think it's probably, it's definitely still curiosity driven in the sense like I do like getting out there and like pushing myself and seeing how much I can improve. But then also it's just, I don't know, I just like doing it for its own sake. Like it's just part of my life. It's part of my routine. Like all my friends run, like I run with people. It's part of like my whole social network. I just really enjoy it. Like even if I couldn't ever race again and like improve my time, or like I'd never get faster, and like that were just like a fact, and we just knew that as a fact, I would still be out there as many days as I could doing my routine that involves running and being with my crazy friends who do the same thing. And I think my relationship with running has definitely evolved over the last dozen years, from being like really curiosity driven and kind of like, I'm definitely still competitive, but I definitely have grown to love running for the sake of being outside and moving my body and being with people who, I really enjoy the company of.
I also like how you mentioned it's meditative. And I always thought that every time I went out for a run, especially if I was in the woods or, in a quiet space, I really loved that meditative aspect of it. And I'm sure, like you mentioned, that the longer you go, I mean, I only did, up to about 30 miles before I had to stop, but the longer you go, the more that happens. And I've always noticed my trail runners are so much more relaxed than my marathon runners. And I wonder if that's surprising. A part of it. Really?
Yeah, I don't know. It could go either way. I definitely know trail runners that are more laid back. I definitely have friends that are trail runners that are also a bit more type A, so to speak.
Yeah, it's probably across the board.
Yeah.
It's just my experience. The other thing I liked that you said, and I think a lot of our listeners can relate to, is how hard you work. And I know a lot of people work very hard, but not being naturally fast, but then being able to achieve all of these goals, putting in the work. And one of the things about you that I always loved was every time I came into the lab, you were sitting on an exercise ball. Whenever I saw you, you were riding your bike to work or finding a way to ride your bike to work or wherever you were going. So every time I saw you, you were moving and using your body and conditioning it.
Yeah. So the exercise ball, I really do not like sitting in chairs for a long period of time. So that also helps me stay on the exercise ball. But yeah, I mean, hip flexors, right?
Yeah.
At least on the exercise ball, if you like sit the right way, you can kind of like reduce your hip flexors just being on, like firing all day long for, 8 hours. I thought that helped a lot with that, the hip flexor tightness that I certainly have. I love commuting. I just love starting my day riding my bike into work. And I do not like sitting in traffic. And obviously Atlanta is Atlanta. So I definitely really enjoyed bike commuting during my time in Atlanta. That was definitely something I liked. And you can't avoid the hills, so you got to train on them.
That's true. Can you do it now, or are you just doing everything remote?
I'm working remotely mostly. When I was in Atlanta, I rode it in every day. I'm currently working a little bit at Kansas University Medical Center, and it's not in a location that I can really bike there safely right now. So unfortunately, I have had to give up my bike commute on the days I go in there. But yeah, I'm hoping to get back to it in our next location, wherever that is.
Speaking of right now, you are pregnant.
Yes, I am.
Yay.
I'm going into my third trimester like next week, I think. So
wow, yeah. That happened fast for me, but probably not you.
Actually, I felt really good this time around too. I think I've been pretty fortunate with my pregnancy running experience.
So you have Jordan. Is she 1.5 or 2? How old is she now?
She is almost 2.5 now.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. So story with Jordan, I was training for Western States in 20, what was it? 28. Yeah, it was 2018 because I ran Western States in 2017, came in top 10, got my ticket to go back. And anyone who knows Western States knows it's like pretty hard to get into with an entry. And I was training for that. I was running over 100 miles a week, I think at that point. It was like March or something. And yeah, stuff started feeling a little off in training. I found out I was pregnant. Yeah, it was unplanned and very surprising and kind of like, oh my gosh, I haven't done my research on this. Yeah, I know.
I remember you coming to me.
I researched this type of stuff. Yeah, I researched this type of stuff pretty thoroughly before I get into it, typically. Yeah, so it was a fun surprise. Our daughter Jordan's great. She was, so I did not run Western States at like 6 months or 5.5 months pregnant or whatever I would have been. I felt pretty great the whole pregnancy with her. I mean, I was able to run the entire time. I think I ran 6 miles the day I finally went into labor. She was super late. So yeah, it was really good. Actually, the first trimester with Jordan was like the worst one for me. I just felt sick and tired and like, all the time. And I think the first trimester is really hard because you don't look like you're pregnant and like people don't know you're pregnant yet. You feel like you shouldn't be changing anything because like nothing looks different outwardly, but like you have like these hormones just surging through your body and everything is just totally out of whack. And like, at work, I was so tired and I felt like I had to like maintain the same productivity because like no one knew what was going on. And like, I don't know, the first trimester was really hard. I think I think the first trimester it has definitely, in my experience so far, in both my pregnancies has been the hardest. But yeah, and then, I mean, the third trimester, you're just like big. I don't know. I wasn't having any pain or anything though. So I was able to run through the whole thing. I actually, before this call, I was just looking back at like my training log through my whole first pregnancy.
That's incredible that you kept that. And I think that that's such a good learning tool. And you don't really remember unless you write it down.
The first trimester, I like dropped my mileage by like so this was also really hard because like my doctor didn't really like know anything about,
Yes.
They didn't like really understand like what, like, oh, I run. It's like, oh yeah, you can keep running like the same that you were. I was running like 100 miles a week. They're like, wow, that sounds like a lot. Okay. So I was like,
oh my God.
I know. So like me and my brain, I was like, there's no reason that I shouldn't be running 100 miles a week still. And so I was like still gunning for that. And then I think I actually reduced my mileage by like 50% in the first trimester, puking in the bushes on my morning runs like that. Like it was just all of that. But running didn't make me feel worse. So I was just like, well, I'm either going to feel sick and not run, or I'm going to feel sick and run. So I might as well just keep running. So I did really dramatically cut my mileage though, because I was also training for Western States. So I was like coming from that level of training down. And then the other crazy thing that happens in the first trimester before you gain any weight or you show anything at all is that the progesterone sucks all the stiffness out of your tendons. So like your Achilles tendons are like totally compliant and it feels like you're running on sand because you have no like recoil and spring system, or your spring system is way dampened mechanically. So just mechanically, you're just like at this total, you're just running in quicksand essentially.
It feels so heavy. Even if you haven't gained a lot of weight because of that and the inability to restore or to store energy, everything feels like you're pounding and you're heavy and you feel so much bigger than you are. At least that was my experience.
Yeah. You feel really heavy. Your legs are just like lead. I would like to say it gets better. Maybe you just get more used to it. It's just like such a quick thing because it's like you're all springy one day and fit and like you feel fit, you still are fit, but it's just like that progesterone kicks up a notch and you're just like, like someone just like let the air out of you. That's fun in the first trimester. But again, like it's hard because if you're running with like your normal friends, like no one knows you're pregnant. You haven't told them. So it's a hard place to be, I think, mentally.
I think you're right. You said it was a surprise with Jordan and it was a surprise with Andy, my son as well. And so I was training for half Ironman and I was like totally getting ready for it. And then one day I kept crying all the time. And I was like, why am I crying all the time? Like I had to change the tube on my tire. So I was crying about it. I felt like I was slow and I didn't understand why. And then I found out I was pregnant and I was like, oh, right. Hormones. And my training partner at the time, I hadn't told her, she just looked at me one day and she's like, dude, I know you're pregnant. I can totally tell. I've been there.
Oh, that's funny.
Yeah, it was really funny. And then, so it was the reason I wanted to have this conversation with you for many reasons, but one is just to like let women know, hey, we can continue to run while we're pregnant if it feels good. And these are some of the things that we've experienced during our journey. So do you have any advice for women that want to continue to be active and exercise during pregnancy?
Yeah, the thing that has been really important to me, both in my pregnancy with Jordan and my current pregnancy, has really just been sticking with my routine. Like right now, and when I was living in Atlanta and pregnant with Jordan, I always run in the morning or I always exercise in the morning. And so I just kept that routine. It looked different. It looked very different, especially, when you're really big in the third trimester. Later in my third trimester, I was doing like, run, walk type things, but I was still getting out there at the same time every morning before work. Some mornings I would run an hour and a half. I wasn't going that long, at the end of my third trimester. But I'd still be out there for 45 minutes and I'd still get in my run. And then I also started doing more cross training. Maybe that run is getting on the elliptical or maybe it's getting on the Stairmaster. I really liked the Stairmaster because I found that I could actually still achieve like a pretty high intensity on the Stairmaster, but without the impact of running. Actually, I found like later in my pregnancy, especially with Jordan and actually kind of where I'm at right now, it's actually hard for me to get that like stimulus of like a higher intensity workout just because of the mechanical loading and like impact. And it's just like, it gets way too awkward mechanically to go that fast or that hard before it gets like hard effort wise. I just shifted to cross training a little bit more, but I kept my same routine. And that when like everything's changing and everything's crazy during this time in your life, I just found that keeping my time in the morning to exercise or run, whatever that started looking like, definitely kept me grounded. So I definitely recommend that people do that if they can.
Awesome. And then what about, have you used any support? Like, there's a lot of belts out there. There's different things that you can use to help. Some people put orthotics in their shoes, some don't, some change. Have you used anything to help support you during this time?
I played around with some belts. I never really had too many feet issues other than my feet got a little swollen, but I never had to like up my shoe size or anything. I just wore compression socks. That seemed to help me a lot. The belts I found made it harder. It felt like more that it just made it harder for me to breathe rather than like give me any mechanical support. Yeah. Kind of like once you start running, I mean, that's a lot of load. There's not a lot a piece of elastic can do, even if it's like super tight. It's just like, it felt too constrictive for me and like still not providing me like more support per se. I will say that I invested in a good sports bra, and that was the piece of gear that there was no way I was running without when I was pregnant or breastfeeding. Yeah. There's one sports bra that worked for me. Apparently they stopped making it since then, and I have a bunch of them, but
oh, you're lucky.
Yeah.
I agree with that. I think that's a piece of equipment, if you will, that a lot of us don't even think about until we become pregnant or postpartum and our breasts get huge. And they're not something we're used to.
Yeah, for sure. I think during my first pregnancy, my breast increased like over 3 cup sizes. I mean, that's like a lot because I think I was a C at baseline or something. So it was like I needed something for my boobs.
Yeah.
So that has been like the most valuable piece of equipment, I think. This is going to be a learning experience for me because last time I was pregnant in the winter in Atlanta, like my daughter was born in December. So now I'm going to be pregnant like in my 3rd trimester in the middle of like the heat of the summer. And that's going to be interesting.
Yeah.
But I'll let you know how it goes.
Yeah, please. I also wanted to know the differences because I've only had one child, so I only have one experience, but I've heard that there's a lot of differences between pregnancies and how things feel and how you can move and what you can do. Have you found that or not really?
Yeah, especially during like the later part of my first trimester and earlier in the second trimester with my second pregnancy now, I started showing a lot earlier. Like I was the same weight as I was at that time when I was pregnant with Jordan, even like a little bit later. But I was like, my bump just like popped out like much sooner. It was definitely harder to, if you wanted to conceal that, I had to be very strategic with wardrobe stuff. And when you're going running, that's just a lot harder to do than even when you're going to work or something. You can't hide it under like drapey sweaters or something. But that's something I noticed a lot. I started feeling like probably just because you like, and this is pretty common, I've heard with women in their second and subsequent pregnancies, you know, you just show sooner. And that's just because your uterus has been stretched out before. And then for me, I did have diastasis recti. So my core never, like it's always been a little, my rectus abdominis has always remained a bit more separated than it ever was at baseline before I was pregnant with my first. And so that I'm sure contributes to it. But I definitely noticed like I felt more instability sooner with this one. It's natural to kind of like increase the lordosis of your spine. So like kind of like arch your lower back because like you have this big bump in front of you. And I felt myself doing that earlier. And so I just had to be really aware of that. And I probably cut out like my speed work with running a little bit sooner. I transitioned that stuff to the elliptical a little bit earlier this time around because of that mechanical instability that I felt sooner.
That makes sense. And so other than the elliptical and the stair climber, are you doing any certain exercises, any breath work, anything for your pelvic floor, any of that kind of stuff right now?
I would actually be interested to hear your thoughts on this, Kate, because I know you and I have talked about this before, and I've talked about it with Blair, you know, pelvic floor physical therapist who, co-authored your book. And it's just so interesting because the blanket recommendation for women is to start doing sets of Kegels. So like the pelvic floor contractions when you're pregnant. And I read all this in all the pregnancy books. And so I started doing them in my first pregnancy. And then I talked to you and Blair, and you guys were like, your pelvic floor is like way overactive already. Like you really should, like, you are not a good candidate to be doing these Kegels to like increase the activity of your pelvic floor. Because guess what? During labor, to like make the baby come out, you actually have to relax those muscles at certain times. And
that's right. That's
for
exactly
everything to come. I was like, oh, wow. Like, yeah, I mean, it's good to have a strong pelvic floor that's engaged when you're doing stuff. But then during labor and birth, you actually have to relax those at the same time as your uterus is contracting. It's crazy. Like all of that muscle coordination that has to happen, but like you have to relax at the same time as you're contracting and you're pushing. And I actually stopped doing Kegels, and I haven't done any exercise like that in in my second pregnancy yet. Yeah. So I don't plan to unless someone, gives me an eval and says, hey, your pelvic floor is super weak. You need to start doing these or something.
I'm not surprised that you had a really strong pelvic floor because I know that you probably just worked so hard. I mean, I know we talked about it afterwards, but I could envision you working so hard to make sure that that was true so that you didn't have issues.
I would be like waiting in line for something and I'd be doing my Kegels and like no one would know. They're so easy to do wherever, and no one knows what you're doing unless you're, I don't know, making some super strange face, but yeah.
I would say definitely do your breathing though, Jackie. I mean, like that's the one thing, especially if you have a history of that, but anybody, whether they need Kegels or not, definitely needs to do the diaphragmatic breathing and really working into that system, because that can help relax, but it also can help improve core stability. So if there's anything at all, that's the number one most important thing.
Yeah, definitely. I agree about the breathing. I do have a meditation practice, and I think that I got more regular about that actually when I was pregnant with Jordan. And I think that really helped. And I do some breathing associated with that. I also am more cognizant than I probably was before with breathing while I run, and like not doing that, that apical breathing at like the top of your lung space that runners often do. Yeah, that's about the extent of it. Although I have a lifting routine too. So I do recommend keeping up your strength routine when you're pregnant. I mean, I didn't increase weight when I was pregnant, and I did eventually have to drop weight and modify some exercises. And what I also did was I transitioned a lot of my, like double leg deadlifts and squats to single leg to kind of take some pressure off the pelvic floor that gets really a lot greater during the later part of your pregnancy. But yeah, I kept up my strength routine. And I mean, that is just so useful in labor. I mean, I spent most of my labor in like a squatting position. It was like the most comfortable, like the best place that I felt when I was laboring. And that takes a lot of strength to hold that for so many hours. I mean, you get some breaks between contractions, but like, yeah, you don't want to go into that with weak quads and hamstrings. So yeah, definitely. And then also maintaining like your mobility too. If you don't have the ability to go into like a deep squat, and that's going to be the most advantageous position for you in labor. Everyone's a little different, but yeah, I mean, if I lost that hip flexibility, there goes that opportunity for me to kind of help myself out.
I agree. And I'm really glad you brought up strength training, because that's something that Kacy and I talk about all the time, and how important it is, whether you're pregnant, postpartum, or neither of them. The strength training is so important for any athlete. And I love that you actually brought it up as part of what you're continuing to do, because I do think that's, again, something that women are afraid to do during their pregnancy. And you can actually start strength training when you become pregnant if you've never done it before, as long as you start pretty easily.
Yeah. The other thing I will say, especially if you are a runner or a triathlete and you're used to doing like structured workouts and interval training and that type of stuff, you don't have to hang out in zone 2 for like over 9 months. Like you can keep doing that stuff. Like you'll have to adapt. Like I talked about, like I wasn't doing like any type of interval training with like on the track anymore, because it was just too much mechanical, impact. But I transitioned that to the elliptical, and it looked a lot different. Like I wasn't doing nearly as long or like as many, but like it still felt really good, I thought, to like, introduce some intensity in there too into my week. And I was used to that. Like my body was really used to that. And also I'd say, like, even if you have a more conservative doctor, follow whatever your doctor says. If you have anything that, like, any reason that you don't want to get above a certain heart rate, like I know some of my friends who are pregnant said, my doctor doesn't want me to get above 150 heart rate. I mean, you can do like 30-second intervals. Your heart rate won't increase that much. Like it takes a while for your heart rate to get up. Like it usually takes like a minute plus at like a higher intensity for your heart rate to get up. So it's going to get really up there in like, a 5K plus. But if you keep your intervals like short, you can still get that like intensity and your heart rate doesn't spike up too much. So I'd say you could play around with that type of stuff if you're comfortable and your doctor's comfortable with it. And also, like, I mean, that's literally what labor is, right? It's like it's like hours of intervals that are like 30 seconds to a minute long, and your rest breaks get a lot shorter over time, and it gets really intense. So I honestly think that like keeping some type of like shorter, intense thing, I thought that was really helpful for me personally. Also, you can kind of play with like you said, Kate, like your breathing and like even like your mindset, like what I think about now when I'm like in doing my like shorter intervals that are higher intensity is like, all right, like is my brain really going to like just thinking about the end, like getting to the end of this interval? Like, can I like just be in this space right now and be uncomfortable and just like be okay with that? Because like I said, it's hard to describe, but like in labor, you have to like part of you has to relax. And if you're just like everything in you, including your pelvic floor, is just tensing up, then it doesn't help you with like your cervix dilation. It doesn't help you progress in your labor. I think that there's some usefulness to incorporating that type of thing as you're kind of like preparing for labor.
I think 100% you're absolutely right. I think that and that's why athletes tend to have easier labors, not always, but tend to, and they're shorter most of the time. And again, I'm generalizing, of course, that's not everything, but is because we're used to that type of work. And the only comment I wanted to make about this heart rate, I just have to, because this is what I do. The research actually says that there's no specific heart rate. It's about the talk test. And if you can talk and your body is used to it, then you can run at whatever pace you want to run at, unless you have some underlying issue that your doctor is flagging. So of course, we always say, make sure you've been checked out by your physician, but a lot of physicians don't know about running, like you mentioned before, and don't understand what it's like to be an endurance athlete because they, one, have never used their body that way, or they just haven't read the new research, or it just hasn't come up in their career. So know that the talk test is actually a much better indicator than heart rate itself, but you should ask your physician. I do have to say that if you have some underlying condition.
Obligatory disclaimer.
You have to. I don't want to get in trouble.
No, yeah. And I mean, like, there are like legitimate reasons why you would stop running if you're pregnant. Like, I know my one friend I run with, she had this, what did she have? She had like some type of like hematoma or something. And it's just like, all right, you don't want to do anything with impact there. So yeah, your doctor is going to know all of that nuanced stuff for your specific situation. So you definitely need a doctor, and, the other thing I'll say about finding a doctor is like, find a doctor that you like yes. You are a, consumer of a service. Most people are going to have insurance limitations to like, staying with their network. But like, if you don't like it, your doctor, like, go get another one. I literally just did that like a few weeks ago. Like I probably put up with it for too long. I was at 20 weeks here in Kansas, and that I just really was not getting good vibes from this place I was at. And I was just like, I'm leaving, and I'm so much happier already. And it's just like, find someone you like and that your philosophies align. And yeah, it's hard. It really is hard to get a sense from like a website, and it is kind of a pain to change doctors, but like, I'm telling you, it's worth it if you can do it. So
I completely agree. I actually changed my doctor it was pretty early on. I think it was right at the beginning of my second trimester, but it was the same thing. I wasn't getting a good vibe. They didn't understand why I wanted to run, thought it was bad for me. And I just said, you know what? I think this isn't going to work. Well, Jackie, I'm so glad you talked to us tonight. I think this is really great information, and I really appreciate it. And I also miss you. So this is nice for me to be able to talk. I'm sorry, Kacy, I did most of the talking, but we said this might happen because we were talking about pregnancy.
Yes, I appreciate you guys sharing your experiences, because my uterus is empty and hopefully will remain that way. So I'm glad that you guys can spread some knowledge for those who are interested in that sort of thing.
Thank you very much. This has been amazing. And Jackie, if somebody wants to follow you or reach out to you, is there some way they can do that?
Yeah, probably the best way to reach me is Instagram. I'm J_Palm_.
Okay, great. We'll put that in the show notes so people can see that. So thank you very much.
Yeah, thanks, Jackie.
Thank you guys. This is fun.
Yeah.
Thank you for joining us today. We're so glad you're here.
If you love this podcast, please show us some love and write us a review. We're totally serious. Write us a review and subscribe wherever you listen to your podcast. It really helps us to increase the visibility of our show and reach more endurance athletes everywhere.
And remember, the training is so much more than miles.
See you later.
See you later.